Shalom from Israel to all of the Daystar viewers around the world. I'm Moshe Bar Tzvi, the producer and founder of Israel Now News. We at Israel Now News are dedicated to bringing you the full story and the truth about Israel from Israel. It's written in the Holy Bible when David said in Psalm 25:5, "Lead me in your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all the day long." And God says in Zechariah 8:16, "These are the things that you shall do. Speak out the truth to one another. Judge with truth and judgment to peace in your gates. And always search for the truth, and the truth shall set you free." John 8:31. I hope you enjoyed the program. God bless you from Jerusalem. Shalom, shalom.
Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Erin Viner.
And I'm Remy Roth.
The state of Israel is reeling after two Palestinian terrorists slaughtered four unarmed civilians as they were reciting morning prayers at a Jerusalem synagogue. Three of the victims were dual U.S.-Israeli citizens, prompting the FBI to launch its own investigation. 7 others were also wounded in the attack, including 2 policemen, one of whom later succumbed to his wounds, leaving behind a wife and a baby daughter. Security forces killed the 2 terrorists, Ghassan and Uday Abu Jamal, as they wielded axes, knives, and guns during their attack in the Har Nof neighborhood of the capital. Both of the Arab assailants were from Jebel Mukhaber, a nearby Arab neighborhood of Jerusalem. An official statement released from Hamas claimed that the attack came in retaliation for recent Israeli actions on the Temple Mount. Upon hearing news of the deadly terror attack, Palestinians in Gaza immediately began massive public celebrations in the streets. Women and children carried posters of the 2 terrorists, hailing them as heroes and martyrs. They also carried pictures of the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount, captioned with Arabic banners reading, "It's our Al-Aqsa and not the Temple of the Jews." In scenes reminiscent of the celebrations after the 9/11 terror attacks in America, Palestinians publicly distributed sweets and candy as loudspeakers called out congratulations. Both the Islamic Jihad and Hamas terror organizations called for continuing acts of revenge against the Jews. Following last week's discovery of the body of an Israeli Arab bus driver at a bus terminal, although his death by hanging was ruled a suicide by forensic examiners, Arab leaders declared that he was murdered by Israelis and have continued to provoke the Arab community to violence. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the synagogue attack is the direct result of incitement led by Hamas and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. And Strategic Affairs Minister Yuval Steinitz said that the terrorists may have wielded the axes, but the voice behind the attack was that of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas.
German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier wrapped up a 2-day visit to the region, where he met with leaders from both sides and urged them to revive the collapsed peace talks. During the meeting with Steinmeier, Prime Minister Netanyahu expressed his belief that calls coming from several European nations for the recognition of a Palestinian state only hinder the possibility of peace. He said that unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state bypasses the necessity for the Palestinians to make peace with Israel. Steinmeier agreed, saying that he conveyed the same message to PA leader Mahmoud Abbas. Israel's Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman criticized recent attempts to penalize Israel in the European Union. Lieberman's remarks follow a report of a new EU proposal that details the potential placement of sanctions against Israel in response to building in the heartland of Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem. The document is reportedly in initial stages of discussion and is said to call for the imposition of punitive measures against Israel.
Prime Minister Netanyahu has announced his support of a proposal to declare Israel as a Jewish state. He told his cabinet that despite the bills requiring several modifications, it should be clear that Israel is the national homeland of the Jewish people on the provision of equal rights for all of its citizens. He went on to say that the country is a Jewish and democratic state and that democracy in Israel finds expression in the right of every person to vote. It finds expression in basic law, human dignity, and liberty, which promises full individual rights in a manner that is unprecedented anywhere in the very large region around us. He went on to emphasize that the Jewish aspect of the state finds expression in its being the one and only national state of the Jewish people, with a flag, national anthem, and the right of the Jewish people to come here and live. He then went on to address a separate set of rights, those of public security and the deterrence of Palestinian terrorism. He demanded that PA President Abbas put an immediate end to the upheaval, pointing out that while Israel is appealing for calm and for the quiet to return, the Palestinians are continuing to issue calls for escalated attacks. Netanyahu said that the violence cannot be stopped if the incitement leading to the violence is also not stopped.
Worldwide condemnation continues over the latest beheading of an American aid worker by the Islamic State terror group. The parents of Peter Casing gave a brief public statement from their Indianapolis church for the first time since their son's death. They referred to Peter as Abu Rahman, the name he adopted following his conversion to Islam. The 26-year-old victim was a former U.S. Army Ranger who was the fifth Western hostage to be beheaded by ISIS. The group posted a 16-minute video which shows Casing's execution as well as the beheadings of 14 other men said to be Syrian soldiers. Peter Casing was a humanitarian who helped to treat Syrians at a medical facility in Lebanon and Turkey. He was en route to a city in eastern Syria last October to deliver food and medical supplies when he was taken captive.
United Nations investigators say that it is clear that Islamic State commanders are liable for war crimes and crimes against humanity. During a meeting convened in Geneva, the UN called on world powers to ensure that the perpetrators will be held to account for the atrocities that they are committing. The latest findings are based on interviews independent researchers conducted with more than 300 people who either succeeded in fleeing or still live in Islamic State's northeastern stronghold in Syria. The chairman of the Commission of Inquiry on Syria, Paulo Pinheiro, said that executions, amputations, and lashings in public spaces have become a regular occurrence. He added that the public display of mutilated bodies is serving to further terrorize and traumatize Syrians, in particular the children.
A French court for the first time sentenced one of its citizens to prison for having joined an Islamist group fighting in Syria. Flavien Moreau will spend 7 years behind bars after being convicted on a terrorism offense. Court documents identify the 27-year-old as determined militant who has told his parents that he will have no problem dying for Islam. The case is likely served as a benchmark for dozens of other volunteer jihadists who are being held pending trial. French authorities believe that 118 of the estimated 1,000 citizens who left to fight in the Middle East have now returned to French soil. The country is now taking a tough stance against those believed to be linked with terror groups, particularly in the aftermath of the murders of 3 people at the Jewish Museum of Belgium earlier this year by a French national. The gunman, Mehdi Namouche, also fought with extremist groups in Syria. The French Interior Minister said that there is a strong presumption that one of the executioners on the Casing's beheading video is also a French citizen.
The United Nations Commission charged with investigating last summer's conflict between Israel and Hamas has been collecting information in Jordan. The Switzerland-based UN Human Rights Committee appointed the 15-member team to investigate the possibility of Israeli war crimes during the 50-day conflict. According to the official Palestinian Ma'an news agency, investigators are using video conferencing to record the testimony of residents in Gaza since the team was unable to enter the Hamas-dominated enclave from Egypt due to the escalating security situation in the Sinai. The Israeli government is firmly refusing to cooperate with the probe because of the UNHRC's long-established and heavily imbalanced record toward the Jewish state and its blatant pro-Palestinian bias. The final report is expected to be submitted on the 1st of March 2015.
The population registry in Israel has just added a new classification for a community who will now be known as Aramaic rather than Arab. Their recognition comes as a part of the continuing campaign by Arab Christians to integrate into Israeli society and separate themselves from the Arab population. Aramaic Christians say they are celebrating the move as a victory in their quest to safeguard their heritage. Interior Minister Gideon Sa'ar welcomed the development, saying that the Aramaic suffered persecution, oppression, and discrimination in the Middle East, and he praises the Jewish state for protecting the Christian minority and fostering its culture and heritage. The efforts are being spearheaded by community member Shadi Halul, who also advocates enlistment by Christian Arabs or Aramaics into the IDF. The Aramaic Christian community belongs to the Maronite Church, which first emerged in Lebanon back in the 5th century. Their language, Aramaic, was once a common language of the region, spoken by Jesus himself, but it was replaced by Arabic after 7th century Muslim conquests. Now Aramaic is spoken by no more than a few hundred people throughout the world, and members of Israel's contemporary community meet regularly in efforts to revive the language.
More than 1 million Jewish children have been killed by abortion in Israel since 1948. Israel is currently engaged in a demographic war for its very survival as a Jewish state. Imagine what a difference 1 million more Jews would have made for Israel. Friends of Efrat saves the lives of thousands of children every year by providing support to pregnant women in distress. Since 1977, Efrat has saved over 30,000 lives and is recognized as a world leader in preventing abortions. You can play a major role in Israel's survival now by helping us save Israel's unborn children.
That concludes the news portion of our show today. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host Josh Reinstein, and we're here in a beautiful day in Jerusalem on our rooftop studio. My guest today is Dr. Jonathan Spires, Middle East expert and researcher at the IDC University in Herzliya. Dr. Spires, thank you for being on the show.
Sure, great pleasure.
Dr. Spires, a lot's going on in the Middle East right now, and we hear a lot of different reports. Can you tell us a little about the civil war going on in Syria?
Well, the civil war in Syria, of course, has been going on for more than 3 years now. Around 200,000 people are thought to have died. Of course, ISIS has become the focus in recent weeks because of the coalition air campaign against it in Iraq and in Syria. But it's important to remember that the civil war between Assad and his opponents, his mainly Sunni Islamist opponents, is continuing. And Assad, in fact, has ramped up airstrikes against his opponents, understanding that because of the campaign against ISIS, he can probably get away with it with minimal media coverage. So the war is very much going on still in western Syria, in southern Syria, between the regime and the rebellion against it, with no sign of ending anytime soon. The force is roughly equally matched, and therefore I think this war is going to be going on for quite some time to come.
We just had here in Israel Operation Protective Edge, and there were people coming out in the streets against Israel because we were defending ourselves against a terrorist onslaught of rockets. Yet, as you mentioned, 300,000 people have been killed in Syria, yet you barely hear about it. Why do you think there's this juxtaposition?
Well, you have to remember that Israel is a Jewish state, of course, and Israel is engaged in a war against a largely Muslim population. So the Palestinian cause has become a kind of cause célèbre for Sunni and Shia Muslims actually throughout the world, not only in the Arab world. And the motivation for that, as I see it, ultimately is about a sort of deep resentment at the idea that Jews can have control over areas which they regard as Muslim patrimony. So that's the motivation. Of course, no similar motivation exists when Muslims are fighting against other Muslims in Syria or Iraq or elsewhere. So even if the death toll is actually far higher in those areas, it doesn't get anything like the same amount of attention. I think we also have to remember that the Palestinian cause has become a cause célèbre also for many Western leftists, especially in Western Europe, where Muslim populations are growing and therefore Muslim agendas are growing in importance. And that, I think, feeds in also to the disproportionate amount of attention that the relatively benign, actually by comparison, Israeli-Palestinian conflict tends to get.
You know, we've seen ISIS come out and say that they're going to strike in Europe, in Canada, in America. They didn't even mention Israel, yet still, as you mentioned, leftists and people on the university campuses are seeming to side with them against Israel in their narrative. Why do you think that they have taken a narrative that's against their own interests? Yeah,
it's a fascinating question. I've also noticed in recent days, actually, that the kind of language we've heard about Hamas or other Islamist terror groups in the past is now starting to be applied to ISIS by many in the Western left. That is to say, they're saying, well, they have certain grievances, you don't have to condone what they're doing, but you ought to understand it, and so on. I was genuinely quite astonished by that an organization so nakedly murderous as ISIS is nevertheless benefiting from the same kind of relativist justifications. Quite astonishing. ISIS is a problem not mainly for Israel, as you mentioned. They don't directly focus on Israel, though they'd certainly like to destroy Israel. But it's a problem for all the West. It's a problem for Western Europe. It's a problem for North America, and they're going to have to deal with that. The fact there are still some publics trying to deflect attention over to Israel, sadly, up to and including senior elements in the US government, of course, who absurdly and strangely in recent days have tried to claim that the lack of resolution of Israeli-Palestinian conflict is fueling ISIS. The fact that people are still talking that way is hugely problematic, but it doesn't relate to the truth in any level whatsoever.
Yeah, you've just mentioned that senior levels in the American administration are making a comparison. The Secretary of State, John Kerry, came out and said that the so-called crisis in Israel is fueling ISIS.
Yeah.
And that has now become the narrative of radical Islamists, that Israel and ISIS are somehow on the same side,
That's right.
a free democracy and this horrible, brutal terrorist organization. How could someone in such a powerful position like John Kerry be irresponsible enough to make those type of statements?
Well, yeah, it's difficult for me to explain the motivations of people who are getting things so shockingly wrong, and I prefer to kind of do my best to focus on what seems to me to be the self-evident truth of the situation rather than explaining error. It's very clear that ISIS is not the center of the region, but ISIS is a product of a much larger process taking place, which is a conflict between Sunni and Shia Muslims within the Arab world, which is taking place because of the collapse and fragmentation of states such as Iraq and Syria. And that is now the central driving force of instability in the Middle East. And we have to hammer home that point, which is so well establishable by empirical evidence. And I think only thus can we begin to sort of brush aside the chatter and the fluff and the nonsense with regard to claiming that the Israeli-Palestinian process, Mahmoud Abbas not agreeing with Bibi Netanyahu, is somewhere at the center of this process, which of course far dwarfs the Israeli-Palestinian conflict both in size and in historical significance.
We are hearing that experts are saying that ISIS could destabilize Assad and even Lebanese government. Do you think that that is a realistic prediction for the future?
Well, with regard to Assad, I think that they will not destabilize him, because I think at the moment Assad benefits from the very strong support afforded him by the Islamic Republic of Iran and by its various proxies, including the Hezbollah organization and indeed the government of Iraq and allied Shia militias. That is likely to be a strong enough coalition to hold off ISIS from defeating Assad. But certainly Assad's not going to be strong enough to defeat ISIS. I suspect that in Lebanon a similar process is going to begin to emerge, or has already begun to emerge, whereby Sunni jihadis, also ISIS, but also the official franchise of Al-Qaeda in the Levant, the Jabhat al-Nusra organization, have already begun to make inroads into Lebanon, fighting in Arsal, in the east of the country, in Tripoli, unrest now between the Lebanese army and Sunni militants, and elsewhere in Lebanon. So I don't think those people are going to defeat the pro-Iranian element in Lebanon either, which is Hezbollah. But I think the Shia are not going to be able to defeat them. It's going to be a Sunni-Shia war in Syria, in Iraq, and in Lebanon.
Dr. Spires, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
Well, just to say that, from where we're sitting here in our vantage point in Jerusalem, Israel remains, the vanguard to a very great extent of the free and democratic world, an open and liberal democracy, absolutely in the front line of a struggle that's taking place between the free world and the forces of radical Islam in both its Shia and its Sunni expressions. And I really can't stress enough, therefore, how important Israel's role is to the larger Western world, and just to hope very much that people are aware of that and people can stay aware of that, and that the strong bonds between Israel and the democracies of the West, most importantly the United States of America, can remain as strong in this period and in this struggle as they have in the past.
Thank you, Dr. Spires, for being on the show, and thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
It is heartbreaking to learn that there are over 40,000 abortions in Israel every year, many of which are due to financial concerns. The Efrat organization saves the lives of thousands of Jewish children each year by providing support to pregnant women in distress. Please help us save thousands more.
Up next, shining light from Israel.
I see that makers that are coming to our museum coming from different resources. Some of them are engineers, some of them are artists, some of them are educators, some of them are just people that do accounting. I think what they all share is the excitement of do things by themselves.
I enjoy very much to see this fountain of creativity, this burst of energy, of ideas that you see here. And as far as I can, I'm trying to help and empower and expose this phenomena. This is part and parcel of the ecosystem of the Israeli high-tech.
We are planning to develop and to build here a make lab, a make space. So it will be the home of the makers. They can come and use it. They can come and show what they do, and we can inspire young people using it.
We saw here a kid, 22 years old, who built a device to follow the pupil of the eye in order to control a screen of a computer for people who have problems moving their hands.
We built the Google Glass. The Google Glass is like Google Glass, but not, because Google Glass costs $1,000 and Google Glass costs only 40 shekels. No one really never used the eyes to play. So we built glasses with webcam and infrared. The webcam can track my eye changes and play like a mouse on the screen.
The success of the Israeli high-tech to a very large extent is built on the passion of the people. It comes from within. They are passionate about it, they create things, and this is definitely one of the elements of the success of the Israeli high-tech industry.
Please stay tuned for the ICEJ report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
When Israel was established in 1948, it was exactly as the prophet Ezekiel foresaw. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will cause you to come up from your graves, and I will bring you into the land of Israel. Israel literally arose from the ashes of the Holocaust, one of the greatest miracles in human history. Still today there are some 200,000 Holocaust survivors which still live in Israel. According to the Israeli government, there are still 1/3 of them who are in need and live below the poverty line. Over the past 3 years, the Lord placed a unique opportunity before the International Christian Embassy to help those heroes who survived the darkest chapter of Jewish history.
In December 2009, the Aid Department of the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, ICEJ Aid, was approached by Shimon Sabag, the director of the social welfare organization Yad Ezer Lehaver, who was looking for support for a special project. Having been shocked to see Holocaust survivors coming to his soup kitchen for food, he realized that there was a distinct need and began a project to house 14 survivors in the building next door to the offices of the organization.
When we were actually approached by the organization Yad Ezer Lehaver in Haifa for Holocaust survivors, we somehow knew when we visited the project and visited the director that we had stumbled on something very unique. The project was very unique, there's nothing like it in the land, and also the organization itself had a proven track record, and we just knew that we had to start working with them.
Thanks to the generous giving of faithful Christian supporters worldwide, the ICEJ has assisted Yad Ezer Lehaver in achieving what was once just a dream, a neighborhood of multi-dwelling facilities able to provide practical care and a comfortable and safe home for more than 100 Holocaust survivors.
When we actually first met him, Shimon had a great heart and lots of dreams, but his vision for this place was at the most to maybe house 20 people. And we started on this together, not knowing what would happen, and seeing in the end this amazing street full of buildings.
The Haifa Home for Holocaust Survivors has captured the attention of the Israeli press and a number of Israeli leaders and dignitaries. At ceremonies marking the stages of completion, the attendance of senior government officials and leaders has given voice to the need to assist these individuals who have suffered so much. In the past year, the Haifa Home dedicated a synagogue on its premises to provide a place for the survivors to participate in Shabbat services and observe Jewish holidays. The synagogue also provided the opportunity for some of the survivors to have their bar mitzvahs, since many of them were denied this rite of passage due to being interned in concentration camps.
The Holocaust survivors are very old. They are from their end 70s into their 90s, and are quite a lot of them who are poor, they cannot live by themselves anymore, and who are lonely. And that's actually why it was so necessary to have a home for them, where they could feel cared for and they would be able to live their life in security and in a good atmosphere.
I didn't expect in my life that I'm going to end up here, quiet, the price is right, I don't have to pay too much. And I'm so grateful to the International Christian Embassy. After all what we went through, they built for us a home where I'm going to spend the rest of my life here. I'm going to die here. And I'm grateful to all the people in the world who are helping us.
Please prayerfully consider what you can do in order to stand with us to help those last surviving heroes here in Israel.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Erin Viner.
And I'm Remy Roth, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Please join us next week for all your Israel updates.